All right, we're down to the last element of sexual harassment. If you haven't seen them, there's a playlist, I think it's called SH Elements, and we have gone one by one through the elements of sexual harassment, describing what they are, and then seeing how they might apply to Blake Lively's claim in this particular case. We have gone through unwelcome conduct based on sex that is severe or pervasive, objectively and subjectively, and we are now on to the last element, which is essentially damage. Essentially injury. As I say all the time, I feel like this is my job on this earth. You cannot have a civil claim unless you have been damaged, unless you've actually suffered some kind of injury. You can't bring a civil claim for sexual harassment or anything else by just saying, this really sucked, but it didn't really do anything to me. They violated some duty they had, but it didn't really do anything to me. Or they violated a duty that they have, and I think that later that's probably going to hurt me. You have to have actually suffered damage. Now, in many civil claims, including sexual harassment, the damage you've suffered can be emotional. It can be that the way that it has hurt you is that it made it emotionally difficult for you. But in terms of proving that you have a hostile work environment claim for sexual harassment, you have to show that it actually altered the terms and conditions of your job, or at the very least, and it's different depending on federal versus state, that it affected your ability to do your job. I probably should have said this months ago, but sexual harassment, there are two different kinds of sexual harassment. One is the one we're talking about in the Lively case, which is hostile work environment, saying all of these circumstances led to the creation of a work environment where I was discriminated against based on sex. The other is called quid pro quo sexual harassment, and that is like the old-fashioned sexual harassment where it's like, have sex with me or you're fired, right? So this is the former. This is looking at all of the circumstances. So what qualifies as changing the terms and conditions of your employment or affecting your ability to do your job changes with every case, right? There are some things that are really obvious, right? Like this person has engaged in this unwelcome conduct that otherwise meets the standards. And because of that, I can't be alone with them, and being alone with them is part of my job. This person is doing all of this unwelcome conduct, and because I don't like it and because I push back on it, this person is taking away all of the good assignments from me and giving them to someone else, or freezing me out of benefits that I would otherwise get as an employee. Those are the types of things that you have to show in order to prove that you've actually had the terms and conditions of your employment changed or affected. It does not have to be your boss that does it. Obviously, if the person in the cubicle next to you is saying all kinds of inappropriate, unwelcome, severe, or pervasive stuff, that can affect you, right? You then, though, get into sort of the employer vicarious liability element, which is a whole different analysis. So it's easier when the person is your boss, because your boss or your supervisor has direct control over the terms and conditions of your employment. And this is really the big battle in the Lively Baldoni case on this issue. Lively is sure to say in her complaint that as the director of the film, and with Wayfarer being the producer, he and Jamie Heath, who's the CEO of Wayfarer, they were the ones in control of the work environment. And therefore, they had the ability to affect the terms and conditions of her employment. But that is at issue because not everybody sees it that way. And I don't necessarily think that Baldoni and Heath see it that way. So what did Blake allege? So what she put, I wrote it down, what she put in her actual amended complaint was she met all the other elements, check, 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 which is why it wouldn't be dismissed, which is why they didn't bother. That the conduct so altered the terms and conditions of her employment such that it made it more difficult for her to perform her job. Now, number one, I'm not sure more difficult is going to do the trick. Once this case gets going, if all she can allege is, well, it made it harder, but I could still do it, that might be something that the Baldoni people pounce on at a motion down the line. But even if she wants to make the argument that it affected her to such a degree that she sustained emotional damage, and that it affected her ability to do her job, or it affected, made it more difficult for her to do her job. Before you even get to that analysis of like, what does more difficult mean and is that enough? That's when we look at this stuff that people have been bringing up about what about the fact that she apparently hadn't signed her contract. So before I say all of these things, I want to be incredibly clear. None of these things are dispositive, meaning, gets rid of the case just because I say them. These are arguments that people can bring up. These are arguments that I'm sure the Wayfair and the Baldoni people have already thought of, that they are already doing research on, that they are going to ask her about in her deposition. But I'm going to tell you now how they might be part of the analysis on whether she can meet this last element of sexual harassment. So number one, did she even work there? Somebody can't alter the terms and conditions of your employment if you don't have any employment. Now, she's going to make this argument that even though she didn't sign, technically everybody was acting like she was working there, but it's a fair point to make. You were holding that contract over our head, say the Baldoni people, for a reason. If she did sign it eventually, that makes it even worse. So they do have a decent argument. It's at least worth exploring for sure. You can't have the terms and conditions of your employment changed if you don't have any employment. Which really leads to the second one, which is, could she leave? Right? Can someone affect the terms and conditions of your employment if you don't have to be there? Now, you have to be careful with that one because, of course, anybody can quit any job at any time, right? You can't say to someone who is enduring horrible abuse, well, you can just leave. Like, we all know as a society, you can't say that. And the law is the same. There would be consequences to her leaving. She could lose money. She could lose prestige. But were the circumstances and the power dynamic on this set such that she had the power as to whether she was there rather than them? That's the thing I think people keep bringing up, and it's a fair point. And if we ever get to find out what happens with the evidence and the depositions, I really want to know what her response is to that. And that's sort of this issue of, was Baldoni really in charge? Was Wayfair and Heath, were they really in charge? Or was she in charge? And did it change? It could have been that they were in charge at the start, but slowly, little bit by little bit and little bit more, she started taking over parts of the movie. That's where her takeover of the movie, as it has been characterized, comes into play. Because if she was the one making the calls and she was the one telling people what they could and couldn't do, it's very hard for her to argue that Baldoni and Heath could alter the terms and conditions of her employment simply by saying some things or doing some things that made her uncomfortable. In my opinion, when you get to the 17-point document situation in November, the way that we have heard it, and we'll see what the evidence actually shows, but the way that it has been characterized is that she had all of the power in that discussion. She said, I'm not coming back unless you're going to have to refilm all that stuff and get someone else unless you agree to these things. So while I also think there's other evidentiary issues with that document, I think by the time we get to November, it seems like the Wayfarer people might have a pretty good argument to say we had no power left by that point. We may have had the power to, control the work environment such that, yes, we were responsible for making sure policies were followed and investigations were done. I continue to think they have a little bit of liability in terms of not investigating, depending on what the concerns raised were. But it would be very hard, I think, for a jury ultimately to buy that Baldoni was in charge of her, at least once we get to the end of the movie. So that's where all that comes in. I think this is the hardest element for her. If she can get past severe or pervasive, which I also think is pretty tough for her in terms of proof. Severe, unless there's something we haven't seen, I don't see it. So she's going to have to go with pervasive. So we're going to see how that information shakes out. But if she can somehow get past that, I think this last element is the most difficult one for her, because even by her own words, she inserted herself into things and took control over things, ending in her getting that PGA mark, which I think could end up coming back to bite her.